After taking a look at the 1212 AD mod, I realized that I have some unfinished business with Medieval 2 Total War. Specifically, I never took a look at the Kingdoms campaign despite it being in my backlog as something I need to review. I've played several of them before, but never done so for a full review. Today, I am here to make things right by looking at all 4 campaigns for the expansion pack. Are they worth checking out, or are they just a waste of time? The campaign begins in 1521, where the white man discovers the new world known as the Americas. The age of colonization begins with factions such as New Spain, the Aztecs, the Mayans, and the Apaches unlocked at first. The Tlax clans, the Tarskins, and the Chichimec tribes can all be unlocked by either beating them or completing a campaign. Apologies on the pronunciation as well. For this, we will play as the Apaches for the ability to learn the white man's way of shooting guns and cavalry, aka the ploop ploop way of warfare. Early on, battles are a bit difficult to capture prisoners due to the lack of any cavalry by the Native American factions. Most of your victories will be achieved from purely outlasting the enemy and old school skirmisher tactics. This is the case when fighting both other Native American tribes as well as the European settlers. Native American troops tend to have a ton of morale and cheaper upkeep, so numbers are definitely to your advantage. As the Apaches, your buildings consist of building teepees and wigwams. Most of the advanced buildings will be locked until after fighting a certain amount of battles. Fighting the White Devil will eventually unlock guns and cavalry to use. You'll also realize that only dread can be achieved as chivalry does not matter to them. Therefore, it is encouraged to be as aggressive as possible by assaulting settlements, massacring populations, and sacking cities. Most of my mid to late game as this campaign was spent fighting off the constant waves of French forces. At first, it was enjoyable using the trees to sneak up on French colonists and ambush them with multiple armies. However, it started to get very tedious every time a new set of colonists would appear. I'm guessing this is realistic for the Native Americans as they really were fighting an uphill battle. Regardless of how many times they repelled the colonists, they would have just kept sending more until they eventually broke through. Definitely a tragic tale when you think about it. I would say one of the biggest issues with this campaign is the lack of replay value. The Apaches and Chichimec tribes are the only two that can learn how to use guns and counter the white man in that way. Other Native American factions like the Aztecs and Mayans are stuck with their units and can't really get much better. New Spain is also incredibly OP and easy to go through, especially if you spam conquistadors and no longer have to rely on Native American mercenaries to fill your ranks. Out of all the campaigns, this one is my least favorite. I used to really enjoy it for the novelty of playing as the Native Americans, as well as fighting in the Americas, but the lack of real progression from the Native factions is disappointing. Like, is it really that unrealistic for the Apaches to learn how to build walls and fortifications around their settlements? Are boats used to travel down the coast just too advanced for the natives? It's questions like these that sour the experience for me long term. Still, I do think it is at least worth one playthrough to experience. The Britannia campaign opens up with some of the most beautiful music I have ever heard in a menu screen. It's an absolutely gorgeous piece that I recommend to look up called Dream of Albion. For the campaign, it starts in the year 1258, focusing on the British Isles. You can play as England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and Normandy. I've beaten this campaign before with William Wallace and the Scots, so I decided to try my hand with Ireland. The first thing I noticed is all these stone forts on the map. You can store troops there in order to reduce upkeep. This is a great way to help with finances, especially early on with how little I was making with Ireland. Part of that can be my own fault though, switching a city to a castle, but that's besides the point. The goal for me early on was to push out the English forces from Ireland and then counter-attack with a naval invasion of my own. The former was easily achieved, but the latter is still TBD. Battles are more of your typical medieval 2 fare with far more units to play with. Depending on the percentage of culture in each area will determine the units you can recruit. That means that taking over a largely British town will allow you to recruit billmen into your army. This is a great way to fill holes, especially early on when your faction may lack in a certain unit type. There are several events that happen within the campaign, namely that certain unique generals will appear, including William Wallace and King Edward. They usually are accompanied by large elite armies as well as some unique traits and a unique unit model. They are fun to play as, but I wish they were given a special ability similar to the Crusader campaign, which we will get to shortly. Gunpowder also appears in this campaign, which we all know as the Great Equalizer. Overall, this was a pretty enjoyable campaign. It was a fun experiencing getting a more fleshed out British Isles with Ireland, Wales, and Normandy being introduced. As Ireland, it definitely was more of a challenge compared to Scotland having to build up a navy from a non-existent one, but still fun nonetheless. I kinda wish that these factions were in the Grand Campaign, but it is what it is. In the Crusades campaign, you have 5 factions to choose from, those being Jerusalem, Antioch, Egypt, the Byzantines, and the Turks. I chose Jerusalem for this one cause Kingdom of Heaven, so let's go with that. It starts out in 1174, just a few years before the Third Crusade begins. The Fourth Crusade is also featured here, as well as the Mongol invasion and the all-important invention of gunpowder. For battles here, they all start out pretty huge right off the bat. Most of the time, your battles will consist of reinforcing armies from both of your side and your opponents. This means that you'll need to rely on managing the stance of your ally to make sure it doesn't charge in head first or make any tactical blunder. Thankfully, they are responsive regarding the stance you set them to, those being aggressive stance, defensive stance, and shootout stance. The ally will enter in defensive stance, and I usually switch to aggressive stance once I charge in with my troops. Surprisingly enough, the AI was pretty effective in racking up kills and demoralizing the enemy. To be fair, I was being reinforced by Richard the Lionheart most of the time, so I gave the AI as good of a chance as I could. Side note, he eventually became Richard the Chivalrous, which I found hilarious for some reason. Similar to the Britannia campaign, each faction has special generals to take control of. For the Kingdom of Jerusalem, we get Richard the Lionheart accompanied with some elite troops. Along with that is his unique special ability called Heart of the Lion. This rallies all the troops regardless of their position in the map. I rarely have troops break in my battles due to high chivalry, so I only used it for the badass sound effect that came along with it, which I personally feel like he got the short end of the stick, as someone like Manuel Komnenos of the Byzantines can cause an enemy unit to fight amongst itself. Either way, I enjoy these inclusions as it gives each character a bit more flavor to them outside of just being a unique model. Out of all the campaigns so far, this one had the most dynamic storytelling to me. King Baldwin went from being a chivalrous king peacefully occupying settlements and releasing prisoners to a cold-blooded killer executing Muslim populations in mass and executing nobles. The climax of it all was when Cairo was taken over, as he became a full dreaded king afterwards. Tragically, Richard the Lionheart passed away in battle, really cementing the whole die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And also this.
The air was filled with smoke and blood.
As mentioned previously, this campaign is chock full of events that occurred alongside the Third and Fourth Crusades, including the sack of Constantinople, the Mongol invasion, and even the invention of gunpowder. There's a ton in this campaign that make it almost feel like a full-fledged grand campaign. That definitely is a huge achievement despite the smaller scale. Also, Templar gunners exist, which just sounds badass saying it. This campaign was honestly really enjoyable until the end, when it started to make no sense in terms of diplomacy. For no reason at all, the Byzantines decided to attack me while Antioch broke their alliance with me. This was literally right after I gave a ton of money for a castle of Antiochs. To add more of the strangeness, Turkey proposed an alliance along with their map information despite our relations being terrible. I agreed and ended up fighting Antioch with some cannons and incredibly strong knights of Tripoli. After dealing with all the missile cavalry, these were really no match for me. Overall though, I really enjoyed this campaign and saw it all the way through to the long campaign victory. The ending video was a bit disappointing though, but that's alright. I can definitely see myself coming back to this campaign, especially playing as the Byzantines using their Greek flamethrowers. Those things are incredibly OP and can melt troops in mass. Last but not least, we have the Teutonic campaign, starting in the year 1250 AD. Out of all the 4 campaigns, this appears to be the most people's favorite, so I was really hyped about this one. The playable factions for this one included are the Teutonic Order, of course, Lithuania, Denmark, and Novgorod. The Holy Roman Empire and Poland can be unlocked after defeating them or completing the campaign. We will play as the Teutonic Order in order to purge the world of heretics and heresy. For the Empire, I mean for the Lord. Battling with the Teutonic Order really exemplifies just how heavy of a faction they are. These are some of the most highly armored troops in the game and are great in a one-on-one combat situation. Everyone talks about their knights, but the Order spearmen have incredibly high defensive value. These all come at a heavy cost, as they don't really have the mobility to counter the mounted archers of the Lithuanians. The Order does have one light cav unit, but it really isn't good for any sort of sustained combat and can still be picked off chasing the mounted mounted archers. The heavy cost also applies in the literal sense, as their units are incredibly expensive to both maintain and recruit. I actually struggled early on in terms of maintaining finances, but was able to get everything under control in due time. Unique to other factions, the Teutonic Order does not have a family tree. However, it still has a leader that is chosen depending on their traits. Similar to the Britannia campaign, it can recruit its best units from places with a high concentration of Catholicism. On occasion, nobles will come to aid you in your campaign with their own troops. They will only be around for a few turns, but need to be used to achieve great victories. Doing so will award you with a decent sized donation to continue on. This is pretty cool, as in my campaign I got an English noble with some really high quality English troops. He himself sucked, but the troops were good. Lithuania is also a very unique faction to play as, being the last bastion of paganism with the choice to convert to Catholicism. Both have their pros and cons, which helps to add replay value to the campaign. One issue that I've noticed with all the campaigns, but for this one mostly in particular, are the victory conditions. For here, the short victory condition requires me to take over 35 settlements, which is already a crap ton to start out with. For context, most of the factions in the vanilla campaign's short victory involve having 50 to 20 settlements, as well as taking out a faction or two. For this campaign, I also need to have certain settlements from all over the map. I get the game's name is Total War, but this forces me to break off alliances just to fulfill an arbitrary victory condition. I understand this for a long campaign, but a short campaign should just focus on the main enemy at hand and wiping them out. While I wouldn't call this one my favorite campaign, I did enjoy my time with this one. Outside of my main gripe with the victory conditions, it's an overall fun and enjoyable campaign with plenty of events and uniqueness for each faction. I would say this one ranks third for me amongst all the campaigns in the Kingdom's expansion, but that's just my opinion. Overall, I definitely enjoyed these campaigns, although going through it does highlight some of the issues with the Medieval 2 experience. Camera control never feels natural despite the 3 different control settings, diplomacy is just bizarre with constant alliance breaking, and pathfinding in sieges is still abysmal. Regardless, all 4 campaigns are worth going through despite their smaller scale and replay value. The soundtrack for each is also timeless and still a blast to listen to. As always, thank you guys for watching. And this is Powerhouse, signing off.